My son-in-law abandoned me at a train station with no money, but I had millions he could never touch. My daughter's husband left me at the train station. With no money, I had millions he never knew about. The city felt colder that morning, not because of the weather, it was mild, but because every interaction with my daughter's husband carried a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. I had come to visit for the weekend. We weren't close, not anymore, but I still made the effort. I told myself it was for my daughter, for keeping the peace. When it was time to leave, he smiled, that thin, insincere smile, and said he'd drive me to the station. I didn't argue. We set off in silence. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. I tried small talk. He gave clipped one-word answers. It wasn't unusual. He never had much use for me unless he wanted something. Halfway there, without warning, he turned onto a side street. "Shortcut?" I asked. He didn't answer. He slowed the car, pulled over by a row of shuttered shops, and put it in park. "This is as far as I can take you," he said, eyes fixed ahead. I frowned. "The station is still 10 minutes away." "I'm busy," he said flatly. "You can walk. It's not far." Confusion twisted into disbelief. "What? I have a suitcase and—" But he was already getting out, pulling my luggage from the trunk and setting it on the sidewalk with a careless thud. I reached into my bag for my wallet, intending to call a cab. Empty. The small pocket where I always kept it was unzipped, the leather gone. A chill crept down my spine. "My wallet," he shrugged. "Maybe you left it at the house." I checked my phone, black screen, dead battery. I looked up at him. He didn't meet my eyes, and then, without another word, he slid back into the driver's seat, shut the door, and drove off. I stood there on the cracked pavement, suitcase at my side, watching the taillights disappear. The hum of the city felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater. My first instinct was to panic. No money, no phone, no way to reach anyone. But then, something inside me shifted. The humiliation burned, but beneath it was something else. A steel I'd kept buried for too long. He thought this was the end of the story. That he could dump me like an inconvenience and drive away to whatever smug satisfaction he imagined. He didn't know who I really was. He didn't know what I had. And he didn't know that I had no intention of playing the helpless victim in his little power play. I wrapped my fingers around the handle of my suitcase, straightened my back, and started walking. Because this was only the beginning. But I wasn't the helpless victim he thought I was. I started piecing it together on the long walk from that empty street to the train station. Each step brings another memory into focus. Moments I'd brushed, aside, words I'd excused. Over the past year, my daughter's husband had taken an unusual interest in my finances. Not in the way a concerned family member might, but with a probing curiosity that felt pointed. It started small. "How's your retirement money holding up?" he'd ask, casually, as if it were just idle conversation. Then he'd follow with questions that dug deeper. "What kind of interest do you get on your savings? Do you keep your money in one account or is it spread out?" I always downplayed it. "Oh, just a modest little fund," I'd say with a smile. No need for him to know the truth, that my late husband and I had built a portfolio worth millions, carefully invested and protected. It wasn't something I flaunted. I lived simply. I liked it that way, but he kept circling back, like a fisherman testing different lures until one catches. Sometimes his words were cloaked in humor. "Old people shouldn't hoard money," he'd say with a chuckle. "Family should share everything, right?" I'd smile politely, the way I always did, and change the subject. When I mentioned these comments to my daughter, she waved them off. That's just how he talks, Mom. He doesn't mean anything by it. But now I saw it differently. Standing on that sidewalk with no money and no phone wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of bad manners. It was a move in a game he thought he was winning. I remembered the way his eyes would narrow slightly when I avoided his questions, the faint edge in his voice when he talked about family responsibility. I remembered the forced smile he wore whenever I refused his offers to help manage anything, my bills, my accounts, even my will. And then another image hit me, sharp and unwelcome. That Christmas dinner when he joked in front of everyone that one day all this will be ours. Everyone laughed, except me. Something in his tone had felt serious. As I replayed these moments, the pattern became obvious. This wasn't just rudeness, it was strategy. A slow, deliberate attempt to figure out what I had and how he might get it. The realization was like ice in my veins, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Today was his way of testing my vulnerability. If he could strand me once, humiliate me, make me dependent, maybe next time I'd be desperate enough to accept his help. But he'd miscalculated, because I'd spent my whole life making sure I'd never have to rely on anyone like him. And then I remembered the one conversation that made everything clear. 3 months earlier, I had woken earlier than usual. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint murmur of a voice coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was my daughter, but when I stepped into the hallway, I realized it was him. He was on the phone, his back to me, pacing slowly across the tile. I was about to announce myself when I heard my name. It stopped me cold. "Once we get her to move in," he was saying, "everything will be easier." A pause, then a low chuckle. "She's not going to need that much when she's gone." Gone. The word hung in the air like poison. I froze in the shadows, my fingers tightening around the doorway. He spoke about me like I was a piece of furniture to be moved into storage and then discarded. No warmth, no respect, just calculation. He kept talking. "Yeah, she doesn't have anyone else. We can make sure things are handled." Another pause. "Trust me, it's better if we manage it now, before she starts forgetting things." Forgetting things. The implication was clear. He wanted whoever was on the other end to believe I was already on the edge of losing my mind. My skin crawled. Every polite smile, every offer to help, every casual question about my finances. It all made sense now. This wasn't about caring for me. It was about controlling me, owning me. I backed away before he could see me. I didn't want him to know I'd heard, because in that moment I realized something he didn't. He thought he was playing chess, but I'd already built the kind of defenses he couldn't touch. What he didn't know was that my late husband and I had prepared for people exactly like him. Every asset I had, my home, my savings, my investments, was under my name only, in trusts so airtight no one could get near them without my consent. And those trusts had protections that couldn't be altered without 2 attorneys present. He could charm, manipulate, and scheme all he wanted. But even if I dropped dead tomorrow, he wouldn't see a single cent. Still, hearing him talk like that lit a fire in me. It wasn't enough to know my money was safe. I wanted him to know he'd never have it. So when he left me stranded at that train station, I didn't panic. I didn't crumble. I didn't even waste time asking why. Because I already knew, and I knew exactly what I was going to do about it. He thought he was in control. He thought he'd humiliated me. He thought I'd run to my daughter for help, tail between my legs. But he was about to find out just how wrong he was. So when he left me stranded, I decided to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. I made it home with the help of a kind stranger. a woman who saw me struggling with my suitcase and insisted on walking me to the station. She bought me a coffee, helped me get my ticket, and even stayed until my train left. A stranger showed me more kindness in an hour than my own family had in years. When I walked into my house that evening, I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't call my daughter to tell her what had happened. I didn't demand answers. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, poured myself a cup of tea, and started making arrangements. First, the easiest step. I stopped the small, financial gifts I'd been quietly sending them for years, the extra money to cover their bills, the occasional envelope slipped into my daughter's hand for groceries. It wasn't much compared to my total worth, but I knew they'd feel the absence almost immediately. Next, I called my lawyer. We'd worked together for decades, and he didn't ask unnecessary questions. I told him to update my will. My daughter would remain, but only under one condition. She had to divorce her husband before she could receive assent. If she stayed married to him, everything that would have gone to her would instead be donated to charities and educational grants in my name. Then came the part I savored most. There was a property, a lovely little house by the lake, that my son-in-law had been eyeing for months. He'd made comments about how perfect it would be for weekend getaways, how he'd be happy to manage it for me since I didn't use it enough. So I sold it. Quietly. Within a week, the deed was transferred, the payment cleared, and the keys were in someone else's hands. I didn't even get top dollar for it. I just made sure it was gone before he could get anywhere near it. From there, I started redirecting my generosity. The monthly donations to my church increased. A scholarship fund was set up in my late husband's name. I sent checks to an animal rescue that had once saved my old dog. Money was flowing, but not in his direction. And with every change, I felt lighter, stronger, freer. I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to shout or accuse or even let him know I was doing it. Because the best revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as quiet as a locked door and a missing key. Weeks passed, and I went about my life. But I knew the day would come when the absence of my support, my resources, and my cooperation would hit him like a brick to the chest. And when it did, I wanted to be there to hear it. And then came the moment he realized the truth. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, my daughter's name. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, the way I had so many times in the past few weeks. But something made me answer. Her voice came through sharp and frantic. "Mom, we've been denied for the loan." I let the silence stretch. She filled it quickly. "They said our debt-to-income ratio is too high. We were counting on future help from you to make it work, but now—" Her voice broke. I took a slow sip of tea before answering. "I'm aware," I said evenly. "And you should know, there won't be any help. Not now, not ever, as long as you're with him." She was quiet for a beat. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Why are you saying this?" "Because I know," I said. "Know what?" she asked. But there was a tremor in her voice, like she already feared the answer. "I know what your husband did at the train station," I said. "I know about the wallet, I know about the phone, and I know why he did it. I've known for months exactly how he's been circling my life like a vulture." She let out a choked sound. "Mom, I didn't—" "Maybe you didn't," I cut in. "Maybe you didn't know he was talking about me like a problem to solve. Maybe you didn't hear him planning how to get me under his roof so he could get his hands on what's mine. But you saw how he treated me, you excused it, and that's enough for me to know I can't trust either of you with my future." Her sobs grew louder, rawer. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." I closed my eyes. Maybe she was telling the truth, maybe she wasn't. But the truth didn't change the fact that I'd been standing on that cracked sidewalk weeks ago, humiliated and stranded, because the man she chose to marry thought he could strip me of dignity and resources in one motion. And now he was learning there were consequences. "My assets are secure," I said firmly. "Every cent is protected. He'll never touch it. And neither will you unless you choose a life without him." There was a long pause on the other end. Then quietly, "You're really serious?" "As serious as the day he drove away and left me standing alone," I replied. I could hear her trying to breathe through her tears. But I didn't offer comfort, because this wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting myself. And I'd learned that sometimes the only way to do that is to cut the rope before someone pulls you over the edge with them. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet, staring out the window at the garden I'd built with my own 2 hands. The sun was warm, the air was still. I didn't lose money that day, I lost illusions.